as well as their disability benefits under the PAC Act, and most especially deeply harmful to mental health care and suicide prevention for veterans, and to engage in this call for action, restoring the doctors, counselors, psychiatrists, all who are essential to veterans' health care and have lost their jobs, thousands of them. The plain staggering fact is that Musk and Trump are kneecapping the VA healthcare system at a time when the VA projects a 59% increase. That's right, in this fiscal year, going to 2032, a 59% increase in inpatient and outpatient mental health care is projected. Now, they've taken a wrecking ball to the VA in order to save money that then can be used for tax cuts going to people who need them least, the ultra-wealthy, the billionaires and millionaires, at a time when veterans who need health care most will be deprived of it. And the reason is quite simply the staffing shortages that they have purposefully created. 2,400 already, on the chopping block, another 83,000 without a plan or a strategy admitted to us by the VA itself. They're making it up as they go along, but they know they want to slash and trash the VA workforce. This kind of cruel, heartless, heartbreaking approach to the VA comes at a time when they already have 40,000 openings of exactly the kind of skilled professionals that they are firing. 40,000 openings, including 3,000 physician positions, 6,000 nurses, thousands of counselors, janitors, schedulers. And they are firing the very kind of people they are trying to recruit. You would think that the Trump administration's top priority at the VA would be to bolster its mental health workforce at a time when 59% increase is projected, but they're doing just the opposite. Since the beginning of this administration, there have been 2,400 employees unjustly and illegally terminated already, including veteran crisis line employees and the VA newest staffing goal, that 83,000 number that I mentioned before, is going to be cutting employees at a time of ever-increasing demand, even in the short term. All these cuts will do is to harm veterans. There's no elimination of waste or fraud or abuse. In every agency and in every program, there is some waste. But the way to eliminate it is not to slash indiscriminately and draconian cuts as a way to do it. While we wait for these 83,000 employees to be axed by Trump and Musk, we already see the impacts. Employee assistance programs and mental health support contracts for the VA workforce have been canceled. Staff at vet centers, VA community-based counseling centers have been fired. VA mental health staff are being forced to conduct counseling centers in open cubicles, putting veterans' privacy at risk. World-class researchers performing research on mental health and substance abuse disorders among veterans have been terminated. And most devastating of all, the Veterans Crisis Line has seen a recent increase in call volume, largely from veterans who were either terminated from the federal workforce or who were concerned about losing their benefits, or both, because at least a quarter, up to a third or more of the federal workforce are veterans, and they need that mental health care. Amidst that flood of cruel actions taken by the administration, I am proud that my Democratic colleagues have been united in our resistance to these relentless attacks on veterans. And it's not only on mental health care, it's all health care. It's not only on health care, it's on the PAC Act veterans who need that screening, benefits, care. And it's not a matter of eliminating waste, because we know the way to eliminate waste is to go line by line, item by item, carefully and thoughtfully. Or as Al Lippert, the national commander of the VFW, told us, and he was describing the wound that he sustained while in combat during the Vietnam War, quote, "I am thankful that the medics who treated me chose not to take my whole arm for the sake of efficiency. It took a trained eye, a skillful hand, and human intuition to fix me up and get me back in the fight. In my experience, those operating with a scalpel have a better chance at saving limbs than those who operate with a chainsaw." What we're seeing right now, Madam President, is the Doge tech bros under Elon Musk man operating with that famous chainsaw that he has displayed. And they are doing it to the detriment of our veterans and to those who are being fired. As Mr. Lippert said, these veterans are now being told their skills are no longer useful to the government. We're losing people who are genuinely committed to the mission and find a continued sense of purpose in what they do. These dedicated, patriotic veterans, the ones who work at the VA, the ones who are served by the VA, are deeply disturbed and damaged by these actions. And as Mr. Lippert said, finally, we need to stop the bleeding. We need to, as he said, apply pressure and stop the bleeding. I'm joined on the Senate floor today by two of my colleagues who have been integral to this fight, Senator Sanders and Senator Duckworth, who will be calling for passage of their own resolutions aimed at reversing damage from the Trump-Musk attacks on veterans. I hope that our votes on these resolutions will send a message. I hope we will have unanimous support for my resolution and for theirs, that we will keep faith with our veterans and we will leave none of them behind. And so, Madam President, first I ask unanimous consent that the text of my resolution be printed in the record.
Without objection.
And as if in legislative session and notwithstanding Rule 22, I ask unanimous consent the Senate proceed to the consideration of my resolution, which is at the desk. Further, I ask unanimous consent that the resolution be agreed to, the preamble be agreed to, and the motions to reconsider be considered made and laid upon the table with no intervening action or debate.
Is there an objection?
Reserving the right to object.
The senator from Kansas.
Madam President, thank you. Clearly, this is an important issue and one that has received attention by the Committee on Veterans Affairs, and will continue to make certain that the decisions that are made by department officials, by the administration, are compatible with the well-being and best interests of those who served our nation and are now veterans. But, Madam President, the Department of Veterans Affairs does need reform. The status quo is not acceptable. We need to make certain that every veteran, every member of our military who is now a veteran, that seeks services from the Department of Veterans Affairs, that their needs are met. It's been a long-time goal of mine to make certain that the promises that were made to those who served are promises that are kept. And we know things aren't as they should be at the Department of Veterans Affairs. All of us in this Senate have staff members who work on cases, what we call casework, to try to solve the challenges that a veteran meets in dealing with the Department of Veterans Affairs. We all walk the streets of our home states. We have meetings and have conversations with those, and often it is a veteran who comes to tell us the story of what help they still need. And while I continue to believe that nearly everyone, most who work at the Department of Veterans Affairs, many who are veterans themselves, are working diligently to make sure that their colleagues, their veterans that they share that service with, are treated in the fashion that provides them with the best quality care and provides them the benefits that they have earned. But yet we know the system is still far from being able to accomplish that goal. In fact, the Department of Veterans Affairs, so many times we have reports from the Inspector General who outline dramatic changes that need to be made and outline instances in which the Department of Veterans Affairs has failed in significant ways in meeting the needs of those who served our nation. We have about 150, 200,000 veterans in Kansas. They are a significant component of the nature of our state. They are respected and admired by their fellow Kansans, and it is important for us to make sure that the Department of Veterans Affairs is living up to its commitment. It's our job as senators, it's our job as members of the Committee on Veterans Affairs to do those things. And the senator from Connecticut is right. We have provided the tools to the department, new opportunities for veterans to be better served and served in more ways, combating suicide, making certain that mental health services are more readily available, providing services through telemedicine, and most recently, well, almost most recently, the PACT Act, which provided new and additional benefits, both health care and financial, to those who served in Southeast Asia and who served in Iraq and Afghanistan in regard to toxic exposure, and even more recently than that, care for and support for caregivers, those who serve their loved ones, family members who help veterans throughout the day in their circumstances, the Elizabeth Dole Act. So we are actively engaged in trying to make certain, and hopefully making progress in making certain, that more veterans receive better care at every opportunity. But the VA still needs a serious and thorough evaluation, and a component of that is workforce. My goal is to make certain that the Department of Veterans Affairs evaluates how many people it needs to meet its mission and then adjusts accordingly, whether that's more or less, but to right-size the VA to make certain that those veterans who are in need of care, who deserve their benefits, are well cared for and receive the care and compassion that they deserve. So, Mr. President, I'm going to offer a resolution myself. In order to get to that point, I need to object to the senator from Connecticut's resolution. His unanimous consent request.
Objection is heard.
Madam President,
The senator
I
from
want to
Connecticut.
respond very quickly by saying, first of all, I think we share a lot of goals, but we need action. The VA is in crisis, impending right now in real time, affecting real lives in real time. People who need mental health care now, who need the Veterans Crisis Line now, who need those counselors and psychiatrists now. And what I'm asking is unanimous consent for a resolution that calls for restoring the VA workforce to meet that crisis and to doing right by our veterans. It shouldn't be partisan. It isn't partisan. I've been critical of the VA under Democratic administrations, under General Shinseki when he was there, and the delays were unacceptable. And nobody was more direct or critical than I was. We can be bipartisan in our praise and in our criticism, but we need to stand up to the Musk, Trump, slash and trash regime that has been so harmful to our veterans. And we can't go about it with business as usual. These draconian, indiscriminate cuts are doing harm to our veterans as we speak. And to avoid action is not only inappropriate, it is injustice to our nation's heroes. Thank you, Madam President.
Madam President.
The senator from Kansas.
Madam President, I intend to ask for an unanimous consent agreement in regard to this issue of our care and well-being of our veterans. I would indicate that, to my knowledge, the Department of Veterans Affairs has 1,500 fewer employees today than it did at the beginning of the year. While there is conversation and talk and, in fact, a stated goal about the sizing of the department, those steps, either because they are not yet ready at the Department of Affairs to take those steps, the evaluations and understanding of what's necessary for the right sizing of the workforce haven't been completed, or courts have put in place a stay against any reductions in the workforce. Today, we are 1,550 fewer employees at the department than we were at the beginning of the year. I would remind also my colleagues that in the last administration, late in the budget request by the Biden administration, there was a request for the reduction of 10,000 employees at the Department of Veterans Affairs. What my resolution will do is, it's the sense of the Senate that the Secretary of Veterans Affairs should make certain that staffing levels at the Department of Veterans Affairs meet the customer, the veterans' demand to efficiently deliver timely, high quality and let me say that again. The goal that we would say in our sense of the Senate is that the Secretary of Veterans Affairs should make certain that staffing levels at the Department of Veterans Affairs meet customer demand, veteran demand, to efficiently deliver timely, high-quality health care and benefits. And that the Secretary, in close coordination with Congress, with veteran service organizations, and other such stakeholders as the Secretary would deem necessary, needs to consult with them in reshaping the workforce at the department. That we should further enhance our efforts to reduce veteran suicide and improve veterans' mental care. The Secretary should faithfully follow the Mission Act, allowing for care in the community. The Secretary should conduct a comprehensive review of policies governing official time to ensure that taxpayer dollars are utilized efficiently and that primary mission of the department supporting veterans is fully prioritized, and that the department's leadership and management should have the ability to act swiftly to ensure we remove employees who have engaged in misconduct or whose actions and performances fall short in providing high-quality care and benefits. The Secretary should enhance the efficiency, accountability, and cost management in the acquisition programs in the department. We need to make changes at the Department of Veterans Affairs, and this resolution would indicate our support for doing so. And I would now say, as if in legislative session, and notwithstanding Rule 22, I ask unanimous consent, the Senate proceed to the consideration of my resolution, which is at the desk. I further ask unanimous consent that the resolution be agreed to, that the preamble be agreed to, and that the motions to reconsider be considered and made and laid upon the table with no intervening action or debate.
Is there objection?
Madam President,
The senator from Connecticut.
Reserving the right to object, let me first say I appreciate the work of my colleague, the chairman of the VA committee, where I am the ranking Democrat. Chairman Moran and I worked together in a very bipartisan way on a lot of legislation, and I would like to support his resolution, but we received it only about an hour ago, and so I've been unable to check with my colleagues on this side as to whether there is any objection among them. And second, although I would like to support it, I have to say no, because not something it has, but what it lacks. And that is, it fails to mention anything about the Trump-Musk assault on the VA and its workforce, and particularly the negative impacts of those actions on veterans' mental health and suicide prevention. It fails to call for restoring the VA's skilled professional workforce that is necessary to provide sufficient health care, particularly mental health care. I should also note that prior to Secretary Collins and DOJ, wait times for care before they took over and seized control, wait times actually decreased in 2024, while the number of new patient appointments increased by 11%. So this idea that somehow the VA is was wholly failing before this administration is exactly the opposite of reality. The time to process each claim actually decreased. The VA processed 116,192 veterans' appeals, representing a 12.5 increase over last year's records. That's claims for disability and compensation. And additionally, under the previous administration, veteran homelessness reached record lows, a 55.6% reduction since 2010. The VA also made it easier for veterans to seek mental health care while reducing wait times for that care in new appointments, and claims that the VA have been placing more barriers for veterans to receive care in the VA and through community care are simply untrue. Since 2019, the VA has made enormous improvements in customer service and has become more welcoming to veterans through historic outreach. If we listen to veterans, as I do every weekend, because I go home every weekend, what I hear is customer satisfaction, rising happiness with VA healthcare. Sure, there are criticisms. We need to meet those criticisms. There are shortcomings, and we need to improve VA healthcare to address those shortcomings. But VA trust has increased to the point of 80.4% this year, an all-time record, and an increase of 25% since 2016. And let me just say about labor rights and union activities at the VA. Labor organizing and collective bargaining actually expedites conflict resolution. It reduces legal costs. It actually saves money through collective bargaining, not to mention the waste, fraud, and abuse that help the department uncover and address. Those negotiations have allowed the department to bar criminally bad actors from receiving settlement funds and being reinstated. There's a lot more to say on this topic, but let me just finish by saying I hope we can work together. I hope the chairman and I can work together in a bipartisan way to put together our two resolutions and devise one that will pass muster on both sides. Because of the shortcomings of this resolution, I object.
Objection is heard. Okay, I have a question. The senator from Vermont.
Let me get cut to the chase, and I'll try to be brief here. We hear a lot of talk on the floor of the Senate about patriotism, about love of country, about how we have all got to work together for the common good. And it would seem to me that when we talk about those who sacrifice, those who have put their lives on the line to defend this country, we're talking about the men and women in America who are veterans. And yet, what we have seen in the last month from the president and from Elon Musk is a chainsaw approach to essentially destroy the Veterans Administration. And that is, there are plans afoot, public, no one is debating the numbers. They want to fire 83,000 employees. And when you fire 83,000 employees, nobody believes that anything else will happen, but that there will be a deterioration in the quality of health care that our veterans receive, or a delay in the benefits that they have earned. Now, I've heard criticism of the VA. VA is the largest healthcare system in America. Is it perfect? Absolutely not. Does it have its problems? Of course it does. But compared to what? Compared to the American healthcare system, which is the most expensive in the world? a system in which 83 million Americans are uninsured or underinsured, where 60,000 people die each year, where we have the lowest life expectancy of any other major country on earth. So no, the VA is not perfect. It needs improvement. But I will tell you that in the state of Vermont, I talk to a lot of veterans. I'm the former chair of the Veterans Committee, and I've had the honor to talk to veterans of Vermont and all over this country. And in Vermont, what they tell me, there is enormous pride in the quality of care that they get at the VA Medical Center in White River Junction, Vermont, and as well in the community-based outreach clinics that exist all over our state. And I expect, with some exceptions, that is true all over the country. Bottom line is, veterans appreciate the care that they get at the VA. Want it improved, but they appreciate it, and they do not believe that there should be massive cuts to the Veterans Administration. Truth is that in fiscal year 24, before Trump took office, the VA reported over 36,000 vacancies, including 2,400 doctors, 6,300 registered nurses, 1,800 social workers, and 1,200 custodians. When you have a workforce shortage, the solution is not to fire 83,000 people. It is to add people. It's to make sure you know where your workforce is going, that you have quality people, but you don't lay off 83,000 people. That's not just my view. It would seem to me that before you take a chainsaw to the Veterans Administration, you might want to talk to the veterans organizations and see what they think about it. The Veterans of Foreign Wars, the VFW, said, quote, "We call upon VA to reconsider its planned reduction of 83,000 employees and thoroughly review any proposed cuts prior to rolling out further announcements like this," end quote. Paralyzed Veterans of America said that they are, quote, "deeply troubled by actions being taken in Washington, D.C. that are already having a detrimental impact on the services that veterans with spinal cord injuries and diseases like ALS and MS rely upon," end quote. The Disabled American Veterans, the DAV, said, quote, "We are extremely concerned about the leaked proposal to arbitrarily eliminate 80,000 VA employees," end of quote. That is what some of the major veterans organizations are saying, and I've talked to virtually all of the veterans organizations, and they are deeply, deeply, deeply concerned about the cuts that we have seen and the cuts that Musk is proposing. So, Madam President, this is not a difficult issue. Everybody here wants to make the VA more efficient. The way you do that is to come up with some plans. You work with the Veterans Committee, and you see how we can make the VA more efficient. Nobody in their right mind thinks that just firing 83,000 people is the way to go. And let me be very clear. Mr. Musk has made it public that he thinks that we should privatize anything that can be privatized. There are people, not all, people in the Republican Party who eventually want to privatize Social Security. We're looking at $880 billion in cuts in Medicaid to dismantle that very important health care organization. And if anybody thinks that the laying off of 83,000 employees of the VA, the lowering of quality care that our veterans will receive, is not a prelude to the movement to privatize the VA, you would be surely mistaken. So with that, Madam President, as if in legislative session, and notwithstanding Rule 22, I ask unanimous consent the Senate proceed to the consideration of S-Res 165, which was submitted earlier today. Further, I ask unanimous consent that the resolution be agreed to, the preamble be agreed to, and that the motions to reconsider be considered, made, and laid upon the table with no intervening action or debate. Bottom line, do not lay off 83,000 employees at the Veterans Administration.
Objection.
Madam President.
The senator from Alabama.
Reserving the right to object. You know, on November the 5th, President Trump was given a mandate. Get this country straightened out. This included waste, fraud, and abuse in our federal government over all agencies. The VA is a perfect example. Under President Biden, the VA increased its staff 80,000 employees in 4 years. Let me repeat that. Under President Biden, the VA increased its staff 80,000 people. You'd think that this would mean that we would increase the efficiency of our VA 80,000%. Unfortunately, that's not the case. Despite the Biden administration ballooning the size of the department, the VA has nothing to show for it. In fact, wait times and backlogs have gone up. Hadn't worked. So these cuts are not warranted. They are completely necessary. By reducing the number of employees, these savings can be redirected to actually providing veteran health care and benefits while still protecting VA's mission of critical jobs like doctors, nurses, and claims processors. Do the job it was meant to do. And phasing out non-mission critical jobs like DEI officers and interior designers, for just a few, is necessary to get this job done. Now, I don't want to oversimplify this. I know these problems at the VA exist. They always have existed. Since 2015, the VA care has been on the government accountability list. High risk. That means it's being audited. Are they doing their job? Not very good reviews. We have to do better for our veterans. I come from a military family, spent many hours in the VA. Some are good, some are not so good. Let's stand up for our veterans. The VA challenges across the board, from overseeing simple things like safety and access of care, are essential. And it's not by having more people, it's by having better people. The VA is not supposed to be a massive bureaucracy. That's not what it was meant to be. It was created to serve our veterans. This resolution being put forward would directly prevent President Trump from carrying out his mandate that the American people gave him. American people have spoken, and the days of business as usual are over. The VA is going to get better. For these reasons, Madam President, I object.
Objection is heard.
Madam President,
The senator from Vermont.
I am not aware that in the so-called mandate of President Trump, and by the way, he got millions of votes less than Joe Biden got 4 years previously, I don't recall that during the campaign, Trump went around the country saying, hey, elect me, I'm going to lay off 83,000 workers at the Veterans Administration. Yes, we all want the VA to operate more efficiently, but the idea that you can lay off 83,000 employees and make that happen is absurd. The truth is, again, before Trump took office, we had a significant shortage in the number of doctors, nurses, mental health counselors, and other practitioners. So it is disturbing to me that anyone who claims to be supporting veterans in this country and the sacrifices they have made would object to this amendment, this resolution. And with that, I would yield the floor.
The senator from Illinois.
Let me just say that at the VA, we recently passed a PACT Act that added well over 1 million veterans to the rolls to help care for them after they were exposed to toxic substances. This is not the time to cut the funding for the VA. But I am here today to speak on behalf of all veterans who have been fired by President Trump and Elon Musk. Look, Donald Trump couldn't tell you the meaning of the word service or sacrifice if he had a dictionary laying open in front of him. So how dare a coward who cried bone spurs when his nation needed him the most turn his back on those who, unlike him, were actually brave enough to serve our country in uniform? What he has done to our veterans in just a few months since he's been back in office amounts to a total betrayal. For no apparent reason, he's already fired more veterans than any other American president in modern history, over 6,000 and counting. He's been forcing the bravest people you or I could ever meet to have to worry about how they're going to put food on their family's table next week or keep a roof over their heads next month. Madam President, the biggest predictor of veterans' homelessness is not that they're suffering from post-traumatic stress. It is not substance abuse. It is loss of a job. Homelessness is directly linked to joblessness. These folks that Trump fired, these are folks who did 1, 2, 6, even 7 tours, then came home and chose to continue serving their nation by joining the federal service. These are heroes who deserve our utmost gratitude, not a letter from Elon Musk telling them that they failed to do their jobs and that they are out of those jobs. Instead, Trump and Elon Musk gave them the middle finger and a pink slip. Cadet Bone Spurs may like to wrap himself in the flag with one hand, but with the other, he's signing off on the orders that sell out our veterans to line the pockets of his rich friends. And our warriors deserve better. So this afternoon, Senator Blumenthal, Senator Sanders, and I are introducing 3 resolutions that demand the reinstatement of every veteran who's been fired and betrayed by Donald Trump. If Republicans actually care about our heroes like they claim to when they're on the campaign trail, then they will vote with we Democrats and help give our veterans their federal jobs back. Otherwise, they're making it clear that they would rather bow down at the altar of Donald Trump than stand up for our heroes. Thank you. As if in legislative session, and notwithstanding Rule 22, I ask unanimous consent the Senate proceed to the consideration of S-Res 166, which was submitted earlier today. Further, I ask unanimous consent that the resolution be agreed to, the preamble be agreed to, and that the motion to reconsider be considered made and laid upon the table with no intervening action or debate.
Is there objection?
Madam President, reserve the right to object.
The senator from Montana.
My colleague, Senator Duckworth, is a brave veteran of our nation's global war on terror, and Senator Blumenthal is well served, as did many of us. And I don't think there's any disagreement that we want the absolute best outcome for our veterans, combat or otherwise. And we'll always do everything we can in this body and in this government to make sure that our veterans not only have the care they need when they get home, but they can pursue great careers for the next phase of life. But truth also matters. And the truth is there was no outrage from our Democrat colleagues when the Biden administration summarily fired tens of thousands of veterans, active duty service members, reservists from federal contracting jobs and from active duty military service without any due process during the COVID pandemic, when they decided that these people who had very legitimate reservations about their personal health did not have a place in our government or our military, and they were blowing out the side of the service. No due process, not even a thank you letter. They were kicked out of the service, highly trained patriots who fought for this country, who were willing to fight for this country again. That is betrayal. They were betrayed, and nothing was ever said from our Democrat colleagues about that. The truth is the VA. The VA as an organization is meant to serve our veterans. The purpose of the VA is to take care of veterans, not to grow its own bureaucracy. And in the last 5 years since 2019, the VA employment has gone from 379,000 to 486,000 employees over 5 years, a 28% increase, while the VA's budget grew by 77.7% during the same period. During that time, the amount of veterans in our country decreased by 9.2%. So as our veteran population decreased, our employment overhead at the VA increased tremendously. And that reflected a similar growth across the rest of our federal government. So what was going on for 5 years, especially during the COVID years, was artificial job creation by the government on a mass scale. And now, to recover our nation from fiscal tragedy, from $37 trillion in debt and growing, we have to make hard choices. And those choices have to come down to what is working. And what veterans need most of all is a healthy government. They fought to protect this country. They've put their lives on the line, sometimes gave away limbs and family members so that this country could be strong. We owe it to them to make sure we make good decisions that this country continues to be strong. And that means we have to get this government back in order. And that means returning our agencies to pre-pandemic size. And most veterans will support those tough decisions full-throatedly. The truth is President Trump is very pro-veteran. His policies right now are putting our service members first. He is showing strength on the world stage instead of weakness, which has brought untold tragedy not just on our military, but also on our allies around the world. Growing the government with no end in sight, growing agencies with no metrics for success is not pro-veteran. That's not pro-American. It's just more government. And the truth is, whether it's the VA or any other federal agency, we're proud to have veterans working in this government across the board. They have preferred hiring rights, as they should, and we're going to protect their important jobs and, most importantly, protect their care when they get out. But the VA has to be a healthy, functioning organization for that to occur, as do other agencies. Veteran employment is a core value that we have in our federal workforce. President Trump knows that, this body knows that, and we will protect it. But we also owe those veterans a strong, efficient government. That's what we're going to deliver them. That's what we're doing today. Therefore, I object.
Objection is heard.
Madam President,
The senator from Illinois.
I just want to set the record straight that the VA's population of employees did grow because of the PACT Act, a bill that was voted on and passed in a bipartisan way to save the lives of those veterans who would otherwise be dying if they did not have access to VA health care for the illnesses that are caused by their exposure to toxic substances. So let's be clear about why we hired more people within the Department of Veterans Affairs. It was because they were given the permission by this Congress, by this body, in a bipartisan way, passing the PACT Act legislation, which funded care for veterans who were exposed to burn pits in Iraq and Afghanistan, toxic substances through their military service. My resolution is about all veterans who serve this nation. Some of the veterans who've been laid off, park rangers at our National Park Service who are now out of a job, people who were promoted because they were doing such a good job. One person that I have been trying to get their job back was actually working with the Veterans Crisis Hotline. And they were doing such a good job answering the phones that they were promoted to be a trainer. And as soon as they were promoted to be a trainer to help other people to answer those hotlines, which could help veterans, stop veterans from contemplating death by suicide, they became probationary employees and they were fired. That is the kind of thing that we're talking about. People being laid off from their jobs, veterans who've worked hard in this country, for this country and have worked hard in the Department of Veterans Affairs and other federal agencies like the National Park Service, like the EPA, like the DOT, and that is who Donald Trump and Elon Musk are firing. If you want to save money, I'm all for it. I am there with you. I've actually passed legislation that saved this country billions of dollars in fraud and waste that occurred in the Department of Defense. I also think that Elon Musk's decision to deport people to India using a C-17 aircraft at the cost of $2 million of taxpayer money, when normally that flight would cost $38,000 if you were actually to charter an aircraft, was an egregious waste of taxpayer dollars. So let's talk about who's wasting money here. It is Elon Musk who's wasting money. It is Donald Trump who's wasting money. And at the same time, President Trump has now become the president who's fired the most veterans in our nation's modern history. Over 6,000 fired and counting. So let's set the record straight. Thank you, Mr. President.
Mr. President.
Senator from Nevada.
Mr. President, I rise to talk about President Trump's tariffs and how they are ruining confidence in our economy. They're raising prices on all of our families, and they're